Hello and a very good afternoon to everyone. I am Sarah Momtaz and I'm joining you all the way from sunny Abu Dhabi here in the United Arab Emirates. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a Londoner, born and raised in a beautiful part of London called Maida Vale. I started my career working in the property development and construction sector and moved to asset management and then slowly through to facilities management, which has pretty much been my forte for the past 15 years or so, particularly when I moved here to the UAE. I've held executive positions for a number of key FM organizations, and most recently have been providing consultancy and advisory services to some major firms here in the GCC. As an IWFM UAE region committee member, I would like to welcome all of you to the 11th webinar in the IWFM Turbulent Times series. So far in this series, we've explored different aspects of the impact of the global COVID-19 pandemic, which has been having a huge effect on the workplace and facilities management sector. I'm sure most of you have experienced that this pandemic has actually turned our traditional working practices and home lives upside down. And as an industry, workplace and FM professionals have led organizations and their responses in the relocation of people's new workplaces, which is basically their homes. While the end of the complete restrictions is not quite in sight, many countries across the world have started to loosen their restrictions in an approach that they hope will prevent a second outbreak. So now it's up to us professionals once again to enable organizations to move back to the workplace. And as such, we've called this particular episode COVID-19, the International Perspective, as different countries are reopening at slightly different times and in different ways. We're going to explore what trends, challenges and solutions we've been experiencing in different regions across the world, and also how cross-border FM services are impacted. I'm very happy to say that I'm joined by three guests today. Each of them will be bringing a different perspective to the international topic. I want to explore with them some of the questions that arise as we navigate our way through to the other side of this crisis and focus on the challenge to move back into the workplace. As for you, the audience, it is a very interactive session, so we will be welcoming questions. Should you wish to pose a question to the panel, please send them through to the question box option, and depending on time, we will be answering as many questions as we can. Although our expert panel needs little or no introduction, before we do get into the discussion, I would like each of my guests to introduce themselves and talk to us a bit about their role and their connection to this key subject area. So firstly, it's a pleasure to introduce Nigel Luca. He's the head of group property and facilities at CGC Group. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody that's joined us from, I expect, around the world. I'm delighted to be joining the panelists today to speak about the pandemic across our borders and indeed what's touching upon our facilities institute. I've had the pleasure of living and working abroad. So I've lived in Singapore for nearly 10 years until very recently. I've been enriched by the cultures and the learning aspects that living abroad and working abroad has brought to me. And I know that many of my colleagues around Southeast Asia, through the Europe regions, have suffered greatly from this pandemic, and my heart goes out to them. But I also know that everybody, no matter where you are in the world, is doing their utmost to try to overcome and take forwards businesses as they think about reopening. I hope today that we're also going to touch on maybe has come out of this. Some good things have come out, and I'd just like to touch base maybe later on what I think some of those initiatives might be going forward. It's been a challenging time for people with their families, but I also take my hat off to all those other support networks, our supply chain particularly, that are our frontline, who have been going to work ensuring our places are clean, maintained and looked after and secure during this pandemic. So we mustn't forget those frontline staff and our supply chain that have supported us so greatly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nigel. Secondly, we have in our presence today FM royalty, or as he's known in my region, the GCC region, the godfather of FM, Stan Mitchell, who is the CEO of Key Facilities Management International. Stan, it's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Sarah. It's the pleasure is mine, of course. My name is Stan Mitchell, and as it says on the slide, I'm the CEO of a company called Key Facilities Management International. Most people probably are aware of me through the BIFM as was and IWFM these days, where I was very involved at the beginning of developing the Institute. And one of the things that I did towards the end of my tenure as chairman of the then BIFM was I got involved in the standards world that we're all familiar with, BS standards, ISO standards, etc. And for people in the FM business, it doesn't sound like the most exciting thing to get involved in, developing and writing documents to tell us to do what we already have been doing for many years. But the reason I did that was because from the beginning, we have been trying to establish FM as a professional strategic discipline, and we won't get recognition worldwide without things like standards in order to do that. And so whilst it isn't, I can assure you, the most exciting thing to get involved in, it is, however, a very, very important thing to get involved in to try and elevate and help education and understanding about what FM is. And I passionately believe FM is a strategic professional discipline. In terms of the topic of this webinar, my company, we're involved internationally, and we're currently working across 4 continents in the world in over 20 countries. And in terms of the virus and how it's being dealt with, it varies dramatically across different parts of the world. Some parts of the world are very upfront about it and very cautious, and other parts of the world not so. But at the end of the day, for us, our people, as Nigel has mentioned, and the frontline staff that we rely upon, the exposure is exactly the same. We are all having to deal with the same challenges in terms of how we deal with that. But the last thing I would say in terms of by way of an introduction is I'm a great believer that in life, in every negative, there's a positive, and you've just got to go and find it. And whilst this is a huge negative for us all around the world today, the positive is the opportunity for facilities managers to demonstrate their value to the organizations that they serve and to demonstrate our professionalism in how we go about doing that efficiently and effectively. And underpinning all of that is not just the health and safety and care of our customers that we serve, but also of our own people. So this particular webinar, I think, is very appropriate to try and assist those of you on the call for a little bit of more information, perhaps, on different experiences around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stan. Last but by no means least, I'm delighted to welcome to the discussion all the way from Nigeria, Wale Odufalu, who is the Group Executive Director for Corporate Services at the Alpha Mead Group. Welcome, Wale, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. This is really a very good opportunity. I'd like to say a very big thank you to IWFM UK for putting this together. Also say thank you to Neil, who supports us a lot from the UK office, and also to the Nigeria Region Committee. Thank you so much for your support. So I have been in the building services industry for about 10 years before going into FM. And I must say that for the region, Nigeria, and for Alpha Mead, we have offices in about 10 different countries, which we support also. The pandemic was by no means something that anyone was prepared for. And so this has brought a new dimension to the role of FM, the individual FM, the FM profession in itself. And the peculiarity we must put into consideration for us as a region is we were just at the stage of getting into, maybe on the brink of maturity. I mean, at different stages. So just as you're settling into getting things right, then, you know, the whole landscape is, you know, turned upside down, and you have to learn new ways of doing things, and you have to learn what are the standards for doing things this new way. There's a lot of things evolving and requiring solutions as we're thinking on our feet, and not necessarily having anywhere to look to for those solutions, because we're all finding the answers at the same time. So there have been peculiarities for us in, again, operating across different African countries. You have various issues of infrastructure, technology, culture, and I'm hoping that we would be able to look at some of these things from the people side of FM and the areas of collaborating, and then the perception of the importance of FM and how this will change, or if it will change and how it will change as a result of the pandemic. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to that discussion, which I'm hoping will cover all of those points this afternoon. First thing I actually wanted to raise to the panel is sort of a two-part question, which is, at what stage of the reopening are you in your region? And what are your reoccupation targets for the workplace? If I can start with Nigel, please.
Yeah, the answer to that is fairly simple. I think we're at different stages depending on where we're operating.
Yeah.
So if you take, for instance, I saw in the presentation write-up that we are maybe behind some of the countries opening up. I'm not sure. I think there's a rebalance now. If you take India, for instance, as an example, they, in parts of their region, were opening up a few weeks ago, but those same places now are thinking about closing down again because the rates are increasing, and maybe they went a bit too early. So I think it depends on where you are. I know, for instance, Singapore and parts of Southeast Asia, they've now gone back to their 1 meter distancing, and there are still restrictions in place, but largely they're open again for their restaurants and their bars. I don't think that we have any targets for what reoccupation looks like. We as an organisation are very conscious that this has to be almost a personal decision about when you can want to return to a place of work or an office. We've deliberately not called it going back to work because we've been working. We found that, you know, the flexibility and the agility of people being able to work from home in what we do has allowed us to continue as an organisation without the needing to go to an office space. So it's returning to the office that we're aiming to do. That's likely to be at different stages and very gradual. I don't think that the social distancing measures are going to go away anytime soon. So clearly we're not going to be able to reoccupy 100% like we did before. I think it's also an opportunity to think about how we want to use our office space going forward. What's the real need for a space to travel to go to work? Now that we know that working from home can be more of the norm.
Yeah, and also productive in a lot of cases. Nigel, can I just ask you, when you are working across borders, what are the main differences that you're experiencing between territories?
Yes, I mean, well, thankfully, like most of, we've got fantastic people working for us, and it's about the people. And what we're finding, that's actually one of the good things that's come out from this cloud, this pandemic, is that actually from a team's perspective, it's brought us closer together. We may be many, many miles away and at different time zones, but it's allowed us to make sure that we reach out to each other. And we have more collaborative webinars and meetings to bring us all together, make sure that people are all right and their families are okay, and that they are managing all right, and they've got the tools that they need to do their job. I think the biggest challenge for us, of course, it might be twofold really. It's about the understanding that maybe some people can't get to work that day. Maybe that there are restrictions in place that stops people traveling. And of course, when you talk about our supply chain, a lot of them rely very heavily on public transport in their regions, and therefore, with the restrictions as they are, they've not been able to get to work. So it's understanding that and understanding what else can we do to try to work around those challenges. the other challenge, of course, is the procure line. That when we buy something, it might take more weeks now to actually receive it, particularly if it's going across borders and through different docks and legislation, of course, sometimes means that it's going to be held up at a dock for longer periods of time. So we just have to probably concentrate more on the tomorrows and look further ahead and make sure that our planning is allowing for these difficult times.
Excellent. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I always tell people that we don't socially distance, we just physically distance. I actually think that socially we're actually a lot more active than we used to be. Thank you, Nigel. Can I ask the same to Stan, please?
If I unmute, it would help. Yes, our experience across the borders is very, very varied. And I think it's when you think about it, when you step back and think about it, it's varied because it's kind of three-dimensional. In any particular country, you have to take cognizance of the local legislation and legislative approach to dealing with the problem. So whether it's distancing of 2 meters, 1 meter, or none at all, you've got to understand that and try and make sure that your workplace and how you manage the workplace and the access and egress from it complies with that. Then, in our experience, it also then on top of that, it varies a lot by the leadership team in the buildings. So you have an MD of a particular location who has their own ideas about what they want to do and how they want to do it. And we need to take that into consideration. And then, of course, the people that occupy the space. Some people may have a major problem, and we've experienced this mentally, about having to go to work on public transport or sit in an office and share the space with other people. And we've had buildings that actually have never shut down throughout this pandemic. And we have buildings that still have yet to open and everything in between. So there is no one size fits all in terms of how we deal with this. I think what we as facilities managers need to do is have the broadest view on the considerations that need to be taken into account, give best advice to those that have responsibilities of the workplace, and then adhere to those decisions, whether it's a corporate decision or a local decision, and make sure that we do what we do efficiently and effectively.
Excellent. And Stan, can you talk to me about the sort of role you see that the FM standards play here?
Yes, there's two things going on right now as I speak. Within the UK, the BSI organisation, which is of long standing, we are working, and I was working on it yesterday, we are working on a guidance standard. So that is something that the original publication happened already, but we're upgrading it because we see it as a live document that will keep being upgraded based on best knowledge. That will be published again on the 2nd of July, so I can make sure via the IWFM that people will have a connection to that. It's a free download, and it's about 20-30 pages of guidance. And the other thing that's happening as I speak is we have a new work item proposal in the ISO Facilities Management Committee to create a formal standard on how to manage pandemics. So that is on the table already, and the next meeting of that committee will be in November, where the work will start. And we are looking for as broad an international input to that piece of work to create an international standard that will give us the ammunition and the preparedness to deal with pandemics as and when they arise, because we're going to be living with this pandemic for a long, long time, and it won't be the last. So it's worthy of some time and effort to try and prepare the facilities managers of the future that they've got an aid memoir against which they can be prepared when the next eventuality comes around. So there's quite a lot going on in the standards world.
Fantastic. And you heard it here first, guys. Breaking news. Thank you for that, Stan. If we can go over to Wale and just try and find out what's happening in your region in terms of reopening and your reoccupation targets.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. So in Nigeria, we've had different phases. First, there was a total lockdown, then you had 50% workplace occupancy. Right now, the government has stipulated 75% workplace occupancy, and for some kinds of businesses, ours are more restricted than for others. Reoccupation targets most companies are looking at would be between 50 to 75%, but just like Stan said, there's a lot of companies are taking individual positions on this. For instance, the multinationals in not just Nigeria, but many of the other countries we're working with, most of them are still primarily working from home. So you have perhaps just maybe IT and the workplace manager visiting the offices occasionally. Cameroon had only a partial lockdown in the first place, so they had their offices operating pretty much at discretion. For Ghana, the lockdown has been lifted, and offices are open, but in terms of occupancy, we find that a lot of companies are going with the sort of rotational resumption, either 1 week on, 1 week off, or every other day, things like that. And then Tanzania and Ethiopia, interestingly, they really never had a lockdown. What they had in place were the social distancing guidelines with stringent PPE usage, and that has been, on till date. South Africa, I think, is one of the ones where we had a very strong level of guidelines. So they went from a level 5 to 3, and they've been on 3 since June, yes, early first week of June, and they're looking to move toward level 2. In terms of the workplace, wholesale retail activity, related activities are permitted within certain time frames. Then in some areas of manufacturing, some of them are open to 100% capacity, while others are only able to open to 50%. So it's really at various stages, and there's a lot to take into consideration when working across teams in each of these different locations.
So as you've mentioned, I mean, obviously a lot of varying factors country to country, but irrespective of their global whereabouts, how does it specifically impact the collaboration, if it does, and if so, how can you improve it at this stage?
Okay, well, first thing is, I mean, before now, already working cross borders, you already have to take certain things into consideration. Already, the fact that people are in different time zones, and you have cultural issues such as public holidays and the cultural significance of this in some countries. So those issues are already in existence because you work across borders. But beyond that, you then have to think of, so how do we collaborate? What are the things that we can do to ensure that we're frequently communicating and staying together? And I'd say that, first of all, a lot of intentional planning has to go into this, because one of the challenges with remote working is that the less you hear from the other side, I mean, from a people perspective, the more people's minds are open to imagination. And because this has impacted the economies for many of these countries, in a place like Nigeria, for instance, we've seen that a lot of companies were considering, reducing staff strength. So if you're not hearing often from the office, for instance, the questions start running through people's minds. Am I still on the team? What's the next mail I'm going to get from HR? I mean, and all of that. So intentional planning for the various levels of meetings at corporate level, team level. And for instance, in AlphaMeet, we had recently a global HSC meeting with presenters from different countries. And that did a lot to bring everyone together and say that, look, we're really all on the same page. Yes, there may be differences, but we can work this out. And active listening, communication is very key at this time, because in fact, the word is empathetic leadership. So you have to look at what's going on the other side. What's their situation? How do I relate with this? I may not have the same situation, but how can we work things out to ensure that there's a win-win on every side, from across the different borders, across teams, and even for individual employee situations, considering that, for instance, working from home, you have to consider things like family time and family interference. And then something as simple as background noise at the time you want to have a meeting can be something that can impact how we are collaborating across borders.
Can I just come in there, Sarah? Do you mind if I just come in there?
Sure.
I just want to support exactly what's just been said, actually. I think that comms has certainly become our king. I think that it's gone up the agenda for particularly from a facilities leadership perspective. Comms is now so important, not just to our own team, but to the wider businesses as well, to tell them what we're doing, how we're doing it, making sure that everyone understands what we're doing and why we're doing things as we are. But the other thing also to the point just made there, trust is now absolutely has to be in place for particularly for the leaders of facilities management or any management team, because to the point where personal circumstances may be affecting your day's work. So long as you start measuring what is the output rather than the time people are working, and allow that flexibility and trust with your team, then it's going to make a much stronger relationship with you and your teams going forward. You have to trust people all the time because they're many miles away. But actually, when you see them on a call, they say, "Look, I can't join the call because I've got to take my children to school. I'm looking after my mother today." Whatever it is, the understanding and trust is now so predominant in what we do as leaders, I believe.
No, absolutely. And I think we've also learned a lot about the backgrounds of our colleagues. You know, we've now know a lot more about their family, their social situations, which you probably never would before. Right, guys, I've got a few questions here, an anonymous question, and I'd like to ask Wale and Nigel this specifically. In the UK, there is a strong sense that COVID-19 is an opportunity for the country to build back better and fundamentally change how we live and work. Is this being seen in other countries too, is the question. So,
great question.
yeah,
Wale, would you like to go first?
Yeah, if you could, please, Wale.
Sorry, could you take that again? I missed that. Just run through the question again.
Yeah,
sorry.
Just basically the question is when we're building back better fundamentally, we want to know in other countries if you're experiencing that too.
Building back better, I heard you say?
Yeah, so basically the question was, in the UK, there is a strong sense that COVID-19 is an opportunity for the country to build back better and fundamentally change how we live and work. Is this being seen in other countries? So have you experienced that in your region?
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. That's clear now. Well, really, yes, because what this has done is to challenge many organizations. And the truth is this, especially on the technology side, some of the things that we're already doing now, we're in 3-year, 5-year business plans for some of the companies. And so they were like, let's take remote working, for instance. Oh, we're not ready for this culturally, infrastructure-wise. But then, you know, the situation forced that thinking. And now we're finding that people are looking at, hey, redefining jobs and job families, job types, and what is critical. Performance management systems are also being redesigned, just like Nigel mentioned earlier, to say what is really important in this role. Beyond activity, should we be looking at, you know, output? And then in terms of collaboration, again, going through difficult times together always makes the teams bond better. And when there's that common feeling of what we've had to do to get through this, you find that there's also a better understanding. For instance, between FM teams, especially internal FMs, and then the other user departments, sometimes previously you find a sort of them and us. Oh, it's the FM team and they don't want to do this and they don't want to, but now there's an understanding and people are looking at how can we work together to make this happen. We're seeing stronger collaborations between FM and HR, FM and IT, and there's the common goal and then the understanding against the background of the concerns that employees have. So we want people to get back to work, but we want them to be safe. And we have to understand that they have concerns. And that empathy, that understanding is making the teams stronger. And then organizations they're asking deeper questions. For instance, in Nigeria, I'll take the banking industry, for instance. It was an asset to have that many branches. But now people are asking questions because some of the branches have been closed throughout the pandemic, well, since the lockdown, and some of them still haven't been opened. So people are asking, do we really need that much space? Can we do better? And how does this impact the bottom line? Some from a cost saving point of view, some from an efficiency point of view. So I think that we're going to see leaner organizations, stronger organizations, and then for those who are on every role, there's a sense of accountability and delivering more, even because the times require us to think differently and to deliver even more to be able to not only come out of this, but come out of it stronger. And just like Stan said, what gains can we make out of this pain? What opportunities are there? What can we transform this to, or translate this to in terms of opportunities and benefits? So we're seeing organizations think better and faster on their feet. Thank you.
Thank you, Wale. Nigel, we've actually got quite a few questions. The next one I'd like to ask you directly is kind of follow up on what Wale was saying. The question's coming from Colin Clark, and he wants to know if the panel thinks that some of the things that we've worked well, for example, working from home, Zoom meetings, etc., would become permanent post-COVID-19.
Undoubtedly, I think that's a given. Personally, I feel that some of the good things that have come away from this is that I think working from home used to always be the Friday thing, right? Say I work from home tomorrow, or maybe just do it for a day or two. This is now proven, I believe, that actually working from home is possible. Now, that's not possible for everybody. I appreciate that. Some things you can't do from home and you need to get to the office or indeed your own workplace. But for the majority of the people we deal with, working from home has now become part of their life. And I do believe that, as Stan was saying earlier, this pandemic is around for a while yet. And we won't automatically go back to the way we were. I don't believe that's going to happen either. I believe there's going to be a balance between when you go to the office and why you go to the office. So is it about collaboration? Is it about those people you haven't seen? Is it about that you want to brainstorm with somebody else that may be better done in an environment like an office space? Or is it just working from your laptop that day? You don't need to travel. I think productivity's shown that actually you can be as effective and probably more effective sometimes if you haven't got that commute to work. You have to get the balance right. There is a danger, of course, that working from home, you might do longer hours, of course. But I do believe that particularly the webinars and the working from Microsoft Teams is here to stay. And I believe IT has become king as well. And I think there's an opportunity for those that may have been shying away from the IT infrastructure before and not used to joining webinars and things, that we've all learned very quickly how easy and how effective it can be. So I think it's here for a while.
Absolutely, thank you. I just before we move on to the next discussion point, I've got a good question here for you, Stan. Questions coming from, just bear with me a second because I've got loads of questions rolling in. Question from Julian. For multinational companies who are seeking consistency across international operations, is there a set of guidance note for FM managers as a starting point to basically acknowledge the local compliance?
The quick answer to that is yes. They're called standards. the ISO standards, and trust me, if you haven't taken a look at them, take a look. There are standards now that have been published for many years, both in Europe, the UK, and more recently in ISO. And these are benchmark guidance notes effectively for FM based on international knowledge from the ISO committee. Currently has 48 countries engaged with it. So it's not that it's the UK's version of anything, it's truly an international collection of what's deemed to be best practice. So there is guidance out there across a number of different standards, picking up on different topics. I would also like to follow on from what Wale and Nigel were talking about, and particularly about technology. Technology of this type is, and as a company, we've been using it for many, many years now because of our international scope with our team. But what we're finding is, and I'm a firm believer that technology is going to be more and more influencing FM and how we do what we do. And as a company, we're quite advanced in the use of IoT and AI technology, sensor technologies that can measure the environment in the workplace and can actually measure social distancing if you want to set those kind of parameters in place. And what we're finding now, because of the pandemic, organizations who were a little bit reticent as to the need for those kind of tools, because that's all they are. They give us knowledge and information that otherwise we couldn't capture, and they influence how we deliver FM. Those doors are wide open now because that kind of technology can absolutely measure the type of environment that we need to now maintain to protect the people in the workplace from a thing such as this pandemic. And by the way, that was the case before COVID happened anyway, because flu viruses kill lots of people around the world every year and have been doing for a long, long time. So that kind of proactive approach to facilities management in managing that working environment is something that is a great opportunity for FM around the world. So I hope
Excellent.
I answered the question about the guidance, but I wanted to just make that comment about the technology as well.
Great, thanks, Dan. Let's move on to another discussion point. Obviously, we're talking about moving people back into the workplaces. So now that we're at a stage where we are returning people back to work, what are the biggest barriers that you've had to overcome? If we can possibly start with Nigel on this one, please.
I think the biggest barriers from our perspective, from facilities, there's not been that much of a challenge really. The guidance is very clear. We follow that. We make the workplace available for people. I think one of the challenges, of course, is having people return, because there's still some nervousness out there. Again, depending on what region you're in, about as an individual, do I actually want to travel to work? It's not about so much about the workplace itself. I think it's about how you get from A to B, and there's still some nervousness out there with people. Also, I think that we mustn't lose what we've gained from this experience, and that I mentioned it earlier about our communications. Communications has been on the mark really, because we've been able to communicate with other teams that we may have been sort of, that's the team, the facilities team, the ones that sit over in the corner there. We've now been able to get to the table, ballroom tables. We're part of the incident management team meetings. We're very much part of the board advice team. So this has given us opportunity. So it's not really so much about overcoming things, it's about taking advantage of maybe some doors that are opening for us as facilities managers that may have been shut before, and we're taking full advantage of that. We, working internationally, we are used to disasters, earthquakes and floods and all those terrible things, but nothing like this that touches so many people globally at the same time. And I think one of the biggest challenges is trying to understand where every single region is and where every single team and office is at that particular time. And they're all at different stages. So, and I think Stan mentioned it earlier, you have some MDs of offices or leaders of offices, the CEOs, and are keen to get their workforce back. So we'll have to, we are advising and be very careful about that sort of messaging that you give to people about going back to the workplace, particularly when they are able to work from home. Let's make sure as an organization that we're getting the balance right. And thankfully, our leadership is very supportive of that.
Excellent. I've got a question actually that kind of runs off what you were saying, Nigel. Questions come in from Craig McDonald, and he wants to know, how are different service lines being affected? Are you seeing a reduction in offerings as the return to the office takes place?
Yeah, was it Craig, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Craig
thanks,
McDonald.
Craig. Thanks, Craig. I think that we've had to be as agile and flexible as our workforce. So if I'm honest, we've put the specification to one side. We've put all that to one side, and we're adapting ourselves. So if the cleaning teams can't get to work or the supply chain can't get in that day, it's okay. One, because the office isn't occupied that much. We can find ways of making sure that we can address it later. So I think we have to have that understanding. The biggest problem I think we're going to be facing is after this pandemic, and when we return to work a little bit more than we are currently. And we have to be more flexible in what our schedules look like. So, and thinking ahead, that's what I said before. So look at your supply chain demands now. Look to see what needs to be ordered that's probably for October. Look at your budgets more in advance and start to plan those and start to place your orders as early as you possibly can to ensure that there's not too much of an effect. One of the biggest challenges we've had, of course, is that we were doing a couple of projects in India for one, and also in South Africa, and those were put on hold. They're coming to life again now. We're getting the work people back to finish the construction works there, but it's a procurement chain that we're now up against. So we're behind still because the items we're ordering, we didn't think about it before. We thought it would just be, okay, you can place an order, wait 2 weeks and it'll be here. We're now talking probably 2 months, 3 months away. So think as early as you possibly can and plan for October, November, December, January even.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Nigel. And Stan, just while we're on the subject of returning people back to work and, you know, talking about the biggest barriers that we have to overcome, how do you think the workplace managers are enabling people to return to work? And is there any alternative method for collaboration between colleagues that are actually being promoted or that you're aware of?
Okay, I think that one of the biggest challenges for us in the return to work is that the goalposts keep getting moved. Whether that's legislation in a particular location, whether that's the opinions of the workplace managers or the corporate organization that we serve or whatever. So we need, as Nigel has just been saying, we need to be very flexible in terms of being prepared to adjust as and when those goalposts move, as I would call it, because that's going to continue. The other thing that is a challenge, and if you haven't thought about it, you need to think about it, is once you do start to return people into the workplace, are you prepared when the virus, the individual that's identified as having the virus occurs in that workplace, and how you're going to deal with it? Because it's in many instances of big locations where there's lots of people, that's not if, it's probably when. And you need to be prepared as how your first aiders would react to somebody who's showing those symptoms of the virus, and how you then protect the rest of that community. And it was mentioned earlier, it is all about trust. We've got to convince those people that we serve, as well as our own people, that we are prepared, that we are dealing with those kind of situations proactively and not in a reactive fashion. So everything that Nigel was just commenting on is exactly the right thing. In terms of communications, we've got the tech, use it. You know, don't be too precious about it has to be Teams, but we all have WhatsApp, we all have various other bits of tech. So what we have found within our company, and we have people in all of those countries that we work in, we're not being deadly serious about the situation all the time. We are trying to create communities with us and the workforce that we work with in our organizations. And I think it's been a great opportunity to break down barriers and demonstrate who we are and what we do within the workplace. Yeah. And I think that will be a huge positive when we start to emerge out of this situation.
Absolutely.
Yes. Can I just follow on? Sorry, just yeah. one piece there, and I'm sure everyone is already, but the cleaning regime and the hygiene regimes are going to change. That's undoubtedly, no matter if you've got hot desking or if you've got permanent desks, the cleaning regimes within our space of work is going to change dramatically. So start to plan for that now, start to look to exactly what that might mean, and ensure that you are flexible in the approach to your cleaning regimes, but ensure that you're also flagging up what cost implications there might well be to that change. People will understand it now, so let's make sure that messaging's right.
Thank you, Nigel. Let's go over to Wale for her feedback.
Yes, thank you. I'll just pick up from where Nigel left off. The cleaning is something that is a very big matter on the table now. All organizations, client organizations, are demanding to see what cleaning protocols. We have put some together, and these are being enforced in our different locations. Now, getting used to that is something else for the employees themselves, because every now and then you're finding the cleaning, the janitorial staff in the common areas, spraying this, wiping that. Again, there are also considerations for the build itself and how the specifications took into consideration that level of constant cleaning and the use of materials. So those are things that are coming up at this time. Again, in terms of barriers, there's still the issue of, I think the critical one is the mindset. So in here we also have, of course, you have the blue collar staff and the white collar staff, and then there are a lot of concerns with many people in offices, because some of the lower level staff have a mindset or a lower perception of risk. As long as I don't know ABC who has contacted COVID, or who so it's not a reality to some of them, and so you find that they're more free with they're more loose with the social distancing guidelines, and this is a concern for some of the other staff that they will end up working with or who work around them. So that's something that the FM also has to bear in mind and be able to balance, making sure that there's compliance with the guidelines in the workplace. Again, there's the employer concern of so here in Nigeria, for instance, a lot of the infrastructure has to be provided privately. For instance, you have alternative power, where the supply from the government grid is not sufficient, so you have alternative power provided. You have utilities which are provided, self-provided by the owners of the building itself. Now that puts a fixed cost on maintaining the building, whether or not it is occupied. And so there's always the challenge of balancing between the levels of occupancy, the safe levels of occupancy, and then the cost of maintaining the building. So for the FM, for instance, it might not make sense to have to power a 1000 kVA generator if I have just 5 people in the building or 20 people in the building. For me to be able to run these systems, I need to have much more people in the building. So those are some of the concerns that are on the table right now, and people are looking at how do we balance this. Again, the remote working and the rotational schedules is something that people are easing into, because it wasn't really a part of the workforce culture here. From the employee side, just like Nigel mentioned, there's the need for the FM to be able to provide assurance. So there's the concern of how do I get to work, and we're beginning to see more people driving, which means more demands on parking spaces. And if your building doesn't have that many, so those are negotiations that will also have to take place. But when I get to work, is it safe? And so people are looking to the FM to provide that assurance. Again, the cleaning regimes come in here, especially when you're talking about common facilities like the bathrooms. And then from the employer side, things like the health insurance coverage. Is COVID-19 covered in my health insurance package? What assurance do I have? And then you still have employees who are managing issues like their school-age children are still at home. For instance, in Nigeria, the schools are not yet open. In Ghana, certain levels of school grades are open, but here in Nigeria, the schools are not open. So even if you can tick all the boxes for workplace safety assurance, there's still the question that the employee faces as to, what do I do with my children? Where do I put them? And how do I care for them if I have to be at work? There's employee preferences to consider. Some did not enjoy the work from home experience, and they want to be at work by all means. but by nature of their role, the definition of their role, they are not required to be in the office. So HR and FM says, you don't need to be here, but I want to be here because I feel better, I work better in the office. And then on the other hand, you have those who, by nature of their role, we say you have to be in the office, but they're not comfortable with having to come to the office. So there's the mental and physical, back and forth about changing from working from home and back to the workplace. And that's something that we're having to deal with on a daily basis in adjusting, bringing people back settled into the workplace.
Thank you, Wale. That's actually, we've got a great question from Charlie Hilton talking about exactly that. But I wanted to direct the question to Nigel. So what he wants to know is, do you think that working from home is going to have a significant impact on the FM market? So for example, in London, where you've got a lot of areas that are made up of office space, if people are not in the office, what is that impact going to be on the FM industry?
Thanks very much. I believe it will have some sort of impact. However, I also see an opportunity here because FM isn't just about an office space. It's about where people work. So what we've noticed as a team over, say, the last 2 months particularly, is that we have to still ensure that our employees have the right tools to be able to work. So our risk assessments, our DSE risk assessments, for instance, are now extended to their place of work, which is their home. So we're making sure that we understand the circumstances they've got in. Have they got the right chair? Are they working off an ironing board rather than a sort of a desk? So understanding what their needs are and trying to add our expertise and our advice to those still working, but working from a different environment. What the workplace will look like after this, I think it's still too early to say, to be honest with you. More space at the moment is going to help because of social distancing. Means that more people can get back. So if you have a large office or more space, you can get more people back. But I don't know what it's going to look like this time next year. I think businesses will look to see how effective people working away from the office has been. I don't think you'll ever replace an office space for the opportunity to meet and collaborate with your colleagues on a regular basis. It's still a go-to place. As I said before, I think we all got to sit back with our directors and with our leadership teams in the individual businesses we support and understand what those long-term objectives are now, and make sure that we can develop a strategy that gives them a place that they can go to. But I do think that the home working and the risk assessments and the health and safety of those people still very much part of our job.
Sarah, I'd like to just add a comment to that very briefly.
Please.
I passionately believe FM is all about people. It's not about spaces, it's not about buildings. Yes, we have to look after those as well. It's all about people. And the workplace, for certain, is never going to be quite what it was before COVID. And if anything, I think it will make the role of the facilities manager more diverse and more demanding, because we have to look after those people, as Nigel has said, wherever they are working from. So that broadens our typical scope outside of any building that exists.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Stan. I just want to go into another discussion point. We're sort of running a little bit short on time, but I think it's very important to talk about this and talk about the trends moving forward, sort of post the pandemic. So I'd like to ask the panel, and again, we'll start off with, let's start with Wale on this question. Wale, if you can let me know your thoughts on this, please. Now that we're moving people back into the workplace, what sort of trends are you starting to notice that you think will stick beyond the pandemic?
Okay, I think it would start first of all with the trends in real estate itself and how it is managed. One of the things that we have seen, which I mentioned earlier, is that a lot of organizations are shedding office space because it's a fresh discovery for many that they've been able to work effectively, at least to a large extent, with the remote working. And then in Ghana also, we're finding that people are beginning to have active conversations with landlords on yielding the spaces back to them. So this, first of all, I think we would see changes in how FM contracts are scoped, and there would be more in terms of the management deliverables rather than just the delineation into hard services and soft services. We've talked about output-based contracts earlier, and I think that's something that will definitely, change. Again, on this side, we have part of the way that many organizations are structured, especially for FM teams, is that you would usually have a central team of excellence that would go around doing inspections for audit purposes or assurance purposes, that the team, especially the remote teams, are following the standards and guides. So you will probably see less travel in that area. And that means that people will be looking more toward technology to be able to get those assurances. So the scope of FM will shift largely away from the traditional FM services. I also think that with the focus on the healthcare sector now, we'll also find that there will be areas of specialization for FM which were not so strong on this, in this region before. So for instance, the isolation centers, the hospitals, would typically have been managed by in-sourced staff and cleaners. And in some of these hospitals and centers, they didn't have dedicated FM, so it was just a part of somebody else's job. But now, with the issues brought to light by the pandemic, they're having to seek, FM advisory on how healthcare spaces should be managed, and that's a big issue for us here in this region. Finally, I'd say that the strategic role of FM is going to come even more to the fore. Just like Nigel mentioned, we're finding now that in this period, a lot more FMs had visibility, they had a voice, they had to be brought into discussions where ordinarily they may not have been brought into. And I think that's a trend that's going to stay, because people have come to realize that the unpredictable could happen, and how your building spaces are managed, how your people work, just like Stan said, is critical, and it has to be brought into play in your business continuity planning. Business continuity planning on this side for us was very much an academic exercise. For some, it was majorly about, getting the contracts or getting the approval of the client, but now it's an active thing. And then finally, on the supply chain side, you're going to find that a lot more contractors are going to be demanding from their subcontractors, what are your own business continuity plans? Because at the end of the day, there's a ripple effect on how ready you are, and that affects how ready I am to also provide services to my client.
Thank you, Wale. We're running a little bit short on time, so if I could go over to Stan and get his input here on the trends moving forward.
Yeah, greater use of technology, as in IoT, AI type technology, as a tool for facilities managers. As Nigel has already mentioned, hygiene regimes are going to have to be different, as will design of not just space, but design of the likes of toilet facilities and foot handles on doors, so that people don't have to intercommunicate whatever viruses they have. I think those are the trends that will absolutely stay and become more part of core FM as we go forward.
And then do you think that shift in investment will lean towards the tech side, Stan?
100%, it's already happening. The tech, the IoT AI type of tech, gives us opportunities that we've never had before in FM, to evidence the reason for change in terms of what we do and how we do it within the workplace.
Thank you. Nigel?
Very quickly, I think the biggest trend, and I'm pleased to say, I think it's respect. I think the respect that teams have for facilities managers going forward will certainly remain. The respect that facilities managers got for their supply chains and their service partners will absolutely remain. And I think we should take full advantage of that. I think we've got an opportunity going forward to be very much part of any strategic decisions that our businesses will make going forward.
Thank you very much. Can we just have the next slide? Because I want to see if I know we've taken a couple of questions, but maybe there's actually quite an interesting question that we've not really discussed. So I'm going to strike this one over to Stan just before we wrap up. We've got a question here from Linda, and she wants to know, does the panel have any concerns about the impact of COVID-19 on our planet? And is there any risk that the dialogue on the subject of climate emergency has been put on the back burner? So the reason I wanted to ask you, Stan, is because obviously you're working on this in terms of standards. Has that been raised?
Oh, 100%. We've just done an exercise of aligning all of the ISO standards with the UN SDG sustainability goals. So that's an exercise we've already done, and we're going to make a permanent committee within the ISO committee to be focused on sustainability via the UN approach. One of the areas that I think will come out of this experience is around how we deliver hygiene in the chemicals, etc., that we use. And that's already progressed a lot in the last number of years, but I think that will continue to play a big part in how we deliver FM services and support.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stan. I just want to extend my thanks to all the panelists, Nigel, Stan and Wale. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful discussion, extremely interesting. I think we've covered a huge amount of very diverse points. Apologies to the audience members who've actually sent some questions through. Unfortunately, we weren't able to cover them all. But just very quickly before we wrap up, wanted to share a couple of slides with you to keep you engaged with all the stuff that's going on with IWFM. So there is an impact and experience survey, which is on your screens now. If you click the link, you can take part in that. And on the next slide, excuse me, you can visit the website to download some information in terms of the Insight Hub. So you've got research reports, good practice guides, guidance notes, and a lot of information there, extremely useful information that you can retrieve from our website. And also, related to what we're talking about, IWFM is offering a lot of up-to-date advice and info regarding COVID-19. And obviously, we've collaborated with some industry experts to compile the information, and that's readily available on the website for you to have a look through and download some documents there as well. And next slide, please. So to the audience, if you've got any questions, just general questions, if you have any case studies, any best practices that you'd like to share with IWFM, please email them at policy@iwfm.org.uk. And I believe we've come to the end of our session, just a couple of minutes over, so it wasn't too bad. Again, a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to the audience and everyone who participated and asked those wonderful questions. And thank you to IWFM. And continue to stay safe and stay well until the next time. Thanks very much, guys, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.